Hey, Flatirons. My name's Zach. We're so thankful that you joined us today. I'm here with Trey Stubbs, and Trey is a friend of mine. He is a brilliant thinker and a great mind, and he is going to talk with us today a little bit about how we teach our kids to use technology responsibly. So, Trey, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed counselor, and one of my specialties is working with teenagers and their families around some of these same types of areas we're processing through today. And I'm also here on the care team. I help out with shift and recovery ministry here too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to lean on you today because I'm a parent of a couple middle school kids, another one who acts like he is, and a big battle in our house all the time is the use of the phone and the iPad, the PlayStation, the Apple TV. And we bought one of those circle devices from Disney, and it started a literal war in our household about screen time, who's using the time limits on what, and all these kinds of things. So it's a big question. It's a kind of an overarching question, I guess, but how can a family instill boundaries around these things in a healthy way and an effective way?
Yeah. It varies per family. And so there is no perfect formula or kind of like, hey, do these steps and you're going to have it figured out. I think too, with social media, with technology, with video games, all of that stuff, it's not necessarily a problem. I think sometimes we can view it as a problem to be fixed. Like my kid has acne and I can try to help them fix it. It's not really that so much. It's a context for parents to be parenting in and helping train their kids in. And so the technology piece, it's not so much like, hey, this is necessarily an issue as much as if we can prepare kids well for it, prepare our families well for it, it can really benefit the family a lot.
So what some of those conversations, maybe, what do those look like?
Yeah. I think that the first step for parents is to identify with each other, like, what are our values or what are our expectations? And not only for our kids, but for ourselves too. I think that we have to look at this in the context of we and not you. It's not just my kid problem, it's an us thing. And this is a family thing. And so if we can have you in family standards that we are also abiding by, it helps so much in being able to help train kids and teens and middle schoolers into like, hey, I'm going to hold myself to this standard as well. And so then we can do this as a family. And it becomes really a family piece rather than just like, hey, this is a punishment towards you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What are some of the kind of like the guidelines out there for how much time kids should be on screens versus kind of what you've seen and what are some of those differences?
Yeah, so the World Health Organization, they come out with guidelines. And then I think too, then what the actual stats say are pretty different. So, for like toddlers or birth through 2 or 3 years old, WHO says try to have really no screen time other than maybe like Skyping or FaceTiming with a family member or friend. Beyond that, for like younger kids, maybe up to an hour, but have it be something where parents are pretty like heavily involved in that. They say for elementary school kids, an hour to hour and a half of like entertainment media, where they're still about parental controls and things like that. And then for middle schoolers, they will recommend like 2 hours. And then as far as I'm aware, they haven't even really given recommendations for teens because I think at that point it changes so much with connection and communication, and social media gets a lot more involved there. But it's interesting if you look at the stats. So on average, this was in 2018. The stat came out. On average, a middle schooler is spending about 5 to 6 hours per day on entertainment media, and a high schooler can spend 8 to 9 hours per day on entertainment media. So the recommendations and what's actually happening is they're a pretty wide gap.
Sure.
And I think even thinking about like a middle schooler spending 2 hours, for some middle schoolers, that's very doable, right? And that's not that much of a problem because they'd prefer to be outside anyway, prefer to be doing other things. For some kids, that's really a challenge. And so I think it really comes down specific to the family. And if they've identified their values as a family and they've communicated those values very clearly to their teenager or to their kid, then that can probably vary a little bit or vary based on a weekday or a weekend and have some variance within that.
So you as a therapist looking at somebody like me who says, okay, so I go to my kid and I say, hey, you have just watched, 5 episodes of that show.
Yeah.
You're done. And it's a battle that rages at that point.
Yeah.
What are some I guess tips for me as a parent to lean into that in a healthy way?
Yeah. I think oftentimes with parents, when their kid or their teenager kind of crosses boundaries, that we can have a more reaction to tendency to react rather than to respond, or even have like set parenting, hey, these are our rules or these are our guidelines, right? And so if you've laid out how you can have 2 or 3 hours of TV today, and the kid then goes 3 or 4 or 5 hours of TV that day, well, ideally they already know what their punishment's going to be, right? So they know if I cross this boundary half an hour, then I'm going to lose it for a day. And if I go an hour over, I'm going to lose it for 2 days. If I go more than that, then I'm going to lose it for 4 or 5 days. Where those are already like those expectations are set so that there isn't so much emotion in that conversation. Because when the kid is freaking out or they're crying or they're angry and the parent is probably either frustrated or even scared, like, oh no, is there something wrong or have I done something wrong? We get more reactive. And I think we even have a tendency to take things off the table that don't even really serve our families very well. So the more you can set those expectations, then it's easier to follow them too. Well, hey, you know what? If you watched 4 hours of TV today, you know that means you lose your phone for 2 days.
Yeah.
Like, that just is what it is. You made that choice.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just have to respond to that.
Yeah. Because it's hard. Like we were talking a little bit off of camera. Like the verse that when Paul says everything is beneficial or everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Yeah.
And the message it says I can get away with anything, but not everything's good for me. And those are some of my like parenting go-to. Like I rest on those as truths in my parenting, but kids can't process that or understand that. And I think a lot of this stuff with technology, what I see is that they get really unreasonable really quick when you talk about it, almost like, honestly, like somebody who abuses substances. And it becomes a really bizarre conversation for me as a parent. I know there's a lot of science around that.
Yeah.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about what some of those, like what's going on in a kid's brain with all this stuff?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why you can get such a strong reaction is because these video game developers or social media developers, like technology is, like their goal is to get us to use it more, right? And so it's not even necessarily, like that's just a business goal for them.
Sure.
And so it's designed to really affect our brains and affect like our draw to it. So when you think about, you get a text or a like on a social media platform, or you get through a new level on a video game, or you find a new video that you have to watch, or a new song even that you're listening to, there is a little bit of like a dopamine hit that your brain is going to take. And now that dopamine, that's a good thing. I think God's wired that into our brains, right? God created that to motivate us to do that behavior again. And when it's a positive behavior, right, it's a good thing. The thing with dopamine is supposed to be limited, right? So we're supposed to, like after a really good meal or a workout, or we achieved something, usually we stop, we rest, our brain kind of regulates again, and then we want that next dopamine hit. But with video games, it's kind of nonstop. Like there's always another level. There's always another activity or another thing you can go and achieve. Same with social media. There's always more to go look at. There's always more of a response to get. And so with technology, it's not really limited. Like you can just continually for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours have this slow dopamine hit on your brain, and you look for the next one. And so then your brain can actually get rewired to want that level of dopamine to make them feel good. So you think about too, we know for anything, if we do something, typically we need more of it to get the same kind of high, right? So that's same with a chemical, and it's similar to video games or to social media or technology. So if I've done this for 4 hours, I need it to be more intense, or I need it to be longer in order to get that same type of rush or that same good feeling. And so really over time, and days and weeks and years go by, our brains start to get rewired, so we crave it almost like an addiction. And even in some brain scans and studies that come out, the brain of someone who may be addicted to technology can be similar to the brain of someone who's addicted to porn, or even the same of someone who's addicted to a chemical or a substance.
Wow. So tell me, what are some signs that maybe, hypothetically my 8-year-old is addicted to screen time and video games? Like what are some things I should look for? Yeah.
One would be kind of what you mentioned there, kind of that overreaction to being told no. Right. So if you're taking it over for a month, maybe they're going to have a pretty strong reaction. But if you say, hey, you're done for the day, or, you've lost privileges for the next day or week or something like that, and they just have this very extreme reaction to it where they're losing control, or they're crying, or they're yelling, or they get really manipulative, that can be one sign. Another sign would be kind of this disinterest in other things that they used to like, right? So last year, your kid really likes to play soccer. Well, now this year, all they want to do is be in their room playing video games or on their technology. So where they used to enjoy something and they no longer do, that can be a sign that they've lost some of that. Another one would be if they're lying or hiding or stealing other people's technology, or they know, hey, here are your standards and this is how much you can have, but they do everything to work their way around it, or just you find that hour to 3 hour boundary just can't be held. That would be a symptom. Obsession, or only when they talk about like that being their whole world, isolating from their friends, things like that. It even changes in sleeping and eating habits. school performance, outside performance, things like that too. And now, for teenagers, right? So eating, sleeping, like that's always kind of wonky. But if you combine a lot of those, or as I'm walking through that, and like, yeah, that's kind of a check, or that's a check. You have a handful of those, it might be an indication that, hey, there's something bigger going on here than just simply a behavior.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the logical follow-up to me, because when I think about even something as basic as thinking, if I train a child up in the ways of the Lord, and in their old age they won't depart from it, or it's a paraphrase of that. But when I think about training my kids, towards a life where I want them to desire godly good things, and instead I find them desiring 2 more hours, on some game that I didn't even ever think that I would let my kids play, right? Yeah. Like that kind of stuff. So once you identify, hey, there's something not good with what this obsession or this addiction or what that looks like, what do you do?
Yeah. It's a lot of conversations. And I think it's important that we don't respond out of fear, but really out of love and recognizing, hey, like if there's going to be a problem, it's probably better that problem is happening within my household, like that it's happening now compared to down the road. So I think that oftentimes we can experience so much fear, and that tends to make us react stronger or react in ways that we don't necessarily need to react in. And so remember, like, hey, this is like a misdemeanor. Like we can work with this. Like we can work with this together. Like this can actually be helpful for our relationship, helpful for our family, even help our family be deeper in our conversations and checking ourselves. And so to know that, like, hey, if you have an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 14-year-old who's addicted to this stuff, or just you're using it in non-healthy ways, it doesn't mean that we can't reverse that. It doesn't mean that we can't still approach that in a very relational way, to help them, to come alongside of them, to even know that, hey, like you're safe to come to, as a parent, as a father, as a mother, like you can come to me, we can do this stuff. I'm not gonna like just have the hammer come down and ruin your life for the next until you're moved out. Like we can work on this together. So I think hopefully that takes a little bit of pressure off of parents too, because we don't want this to be something that's scary as much as is empowering.
Yeah, and I feel like there's hope in that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I guess as a way to kind of wrap up this quick talk, like what are some other things like that parents can hold on to that give us hope in this season that we might not do it perfectly and we might be learning and figuring it out, but what can we hold on to?
Yeah, I think be learners. To know that we're going to make mistakes too, that we're doing the best we can. I've heard the 3 different C's when we want to look at the technology that our kids are looking at. So think about what is the content, right? So what's it rated? And thankfully, apps and video games and things like that are typically rated.
Yeah.
Even programs on TV or YouTube, things like that typically have a rating. So be aware of what the content is. There are some games and shows and things like that are no problem at all. Like, it's fine for these kids to be playing. And there's some that are really mature, but you still see 12, 13-year-olds playing a mature game that's going to have a lot of sexual content or language or violence or drug use, things like that. So recognize the content. Also understand what the connection is, right? So within these apps, who has access to your kids? Things like Snapchat, things like Instagram, video games, they can be playing a video game with anybody across the country. Right, so who has access to our kids when they're in our basement in our bedroom?
And I learn about brand new ones all the time that I never even heard of, right? Or I remember when I was in youth ministry that I would find out that my students had burner cell phones where they would buy a second iPhone and only connect it to Wi-Fi, and they could use almost everything. Or they hid apps under fake app names or whatever. So that's something I don't automatically. I always forget that. But I know that's in existence for sure. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, keep going.
So know who has connection. Then typically there are parental things within that. So guidelines and different blocks that you can put in. That, hey, you can play this video game, but we're going to limit it to this circle of people, or we're going to limit it to even there are ways to help parents help their kids get around some of those things. And then lastly, what's the commitment level? So there are some games and apps that are only are asking for 20, 30 minutes of your time, and it's pretty simple. And there are some games where it's like a campaign. You got to commit 12 hours to this thing, otherwise you're gonna let all your friends down. And so know too, what is the commitment of my family, of my kid? Like what does that look like? And so we think about what's the content, what's the connection, what's the commitment? Those are some guidelines I think that are helpful too. And just being a process, hey, what do we need for our family? As well as I think it's so important that we hold ourselves to those same standards too. If we have a 2-hour limit, but then we're on TV every night for 3 hours, that's not really going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's convicting. I'm not super happy how this ended, but no, I'm so appreciative. This is really helpful for me as a parent. I know it will be for our families in church too. So thanks for your time, Trey.
Absolutely.